I'm an independent game developer. I recently released Ape Out, working alongside Matt Bach and Bennett Foddy. Previously, I released a free local multiplayer game called Foiled, which was released in 2013. I've also put out an arcade cabinet version of that game in the years since, which is in a couple of bars across the U.S. I'm an adjunct professor at NYU teaching game development. It's a top-down action game where you play a gorilla escaping captivity, and the whole thing is infused with a jazz drum soundtrack that reacts to you as you play. The core design pillar of the game is about improvisation and forcing you into a improvisational and reactive mindset. The idea is that escaping feels like playing a jazz drum solo. It's got a very striking art style and sound. It doesn't really look or sound like any other game out there. I think the gameplay is also very unique, and it is kind of full of a lot of dynamics and is a lot deeper than it initially seems. It's kind of trying to be a very tight, aesthetically coherent package, which is something that is somewhat rare in video games, I think. Yeah, I mean, it took a long time to make this game, and it took a long time to kind of figure out exactly what the shape of it was going to be. But I was initially working on the game by myself for a lot of years in there. Turns out you shouldn't work on a game by yourself. That's too hard, technically and emotionally. And so a couple years in, Matt Bach came on board to do all of the sound in the game, and he's done like a really magical thing with it. And for the last couple months of real development, Bennett Foddy came on to do an art pass on the game that really lifted it up and kind of made everything a lot more coherent and made the spaces feel a lot more like the spaces they were trying to represent, as well as just doing some beautiful static art for like the album covers and the menu and stuff. And yeah, I think it was a non-traditional process, and it took a long time and a lot of iteration to kind of figure out what we were doing. Well, I had like this song that's in the trailer and at the end of the game, "Got to Have Freedom" by Pharoah Sanders, and that was kind of the emotional core of the game throughout development. Something that I could come back to and kind of gut check my design decisions against. But it's like a real adrenaline rush of a song when you are really feeling it and you really are blasting it in your ears. And I was just kind of trying to capture that feeling, and that kind of feeling of escape kind of hopefully brings that out and makes it apparent. Yeah, I think some people who feel like because the basic gameplay doesn't really change throughout the game, that they're just doing the same thing over and over again. And I think that is a little bit fair, but I think if you're sensitive to the nuance and the different feel and sound and gameplay elements in each album, each one has a very different sensation to it. But this was like something that I knew some people would feel because I didn't want to do any kind of progression elements in the game. Like your moveset at the beginning of the game is your moveset throughout the whole thing. You never get any extra abilities. The ape never changes. And that was really important to me from the outset. Like, it was very important that the gorilla just kind of stayed a gorilla, and that was a constant, and only the environment around you changed. Because it's a very simple and kind of easy to understand moveset, I knew that that was going to turn some people off and make people feel bored because they don't have new guns or new things to do. But it is really a deep core part of the aesthetic of the game, I think. Yeah, there are new gameplay elements kind of throughout. And because the game is randomly generated, actually figuring out how to add variety to the game took a long time. It just took a long time to figure out exactly what form that would take, because in most games like this, you don't have to introduce anything new every level because it's just a different level, there's different geometry, and there's a different layout. that you're learning every time. But because the levels are randomly generated, which was really important to the feeling of improvisation within a level, we kind of have to introduce something new in every single level of the game, which just to make each one feel unique and feel like something different is happening in it. And it just took a long time to figure that out and figure out exactly what was going to change per level. But kind of once we figured out the album structure and the idea that every level was going to be some kind of escalation from the level before, kind of clarified some of those things and led us to the mechanics that made sense in each album. There's a lot of like Hotline Harambe comments on the internet, which I would say is just a slightly reductive, I mean, clearly the game is somewhat inspired by Hotline Miami and a lot of other top-down games that came out around that time, namely like Teleglitch and Monaco were also inspirations for the control scheme of the game. But, I love Hotline Miami, of course, but we had these very different design goals. The Hotline Miami ends up being a lot about memorization and going through levels over and over again and kind of honing your path through the levels. I just wanted to make something that was more about reacting in the moment and also just something that had a little bit more physicality to it. There just aren't a lot of top-down games that I've played that have a good sense of feel and physicality to them. You generally have very, very direct control over your character. They can feel more almost like a cursor in the space more than they feel like an embodied character that you're playing as. And I spent a lot of time iterating the animation of the ape and just what it felt like to move him around in the space to try to get that sense of weightiness across. And also another thing that I was focusing on was just like more dynamics than in Hotline. Like I wanted there to be a lot of dynamic elements that all could combine in surprising in different ways. Of course, Hotline is amazing, and I love it. And this is building on a foundation that they introduced me to. And of course, the game that Hotline is based on, Hawkeye Man, what's in that game as well. Oh, it's got to be the single, At the end of the game, you unlock like a very slightly hidden single where you have to break into a facility, then escape with your baby gorilla. And it's like maybe 2 or 3 times as long as any other level in the game. And you have to go into it and out of it. And it's like really hard and really intense, and it's all one experience. I love that. I wish... If we do end up expanding the game, which it's not clear right now whether we will or we won't, but I would definitely want to make more stuff like that, where it's like one big level and one big escape. It's I think the best expression of the game to me. That's a good question. I don't know. It's good, right? You've played it. It endeavors to be this very different aesthetic and gameplay experience than hopefully anything else you've played before. We're trying our best to both make this coherent aesthetic feeling and also to have like a real deep, interesting gameplay experience on top of that. That's a thing that I don't think a lot of games try to do. So, I don't know. I think it's cool. I hope you do too.